So we just launched a new jewelry collection called Tales from Within. And my inspiration behind that has been, like, my own journey has been that dance of understanding my own intuition, receiving guidance from around me, and kind of like understanding the whole system of guidance, including tales, right? Tales from ancestors and my own particular stories, but also tales through myths and archetypes that just have been around for so many years and generations. So that's like the underlying current of these creations that we're bringing out. And I know that you, with your work and your passions and expression in your own way, have kind of brought these different forms of how we can receive guidance, the different tools of understanding kind of purpose, soul, the bigger picture, and then also putting it into these physical bodies that we're experiencing this lifetime in, and how to merge it and how to kind of find our way in the most fulfilled or best ways possible. So I'm curious, how that journey has been for you, how you got to that, like what's the passion underneath it, and anything that you've learned.
Yeah, well, thank you. Firstly, just thank you for inviting me on to speak about things that I really love and the mythic world. Um, it just lights me up, and I'm not sure exactly if there's like a linear track of how I got here in a way, but certainly in my early 20s or maybe mid 20s, I'm 44 now, and in my mid 20s, I was a bit of a seeker, early to mid 20s, and in that seeking, I just stumbled upon a lot of interesting people from that seemed to have been sort of maybe exiled or discarded from society as far as the wisdom they were sharing. And there were actually, it's a very Artemis-like thing. There were three women that I met in England. One was a psychic medium, so she was sort of like working in that middle realm. One was, I think she would call herself like a light worker, so she was working in that more upper world realm. And one was a druid shaman, pagan druid shaman sort of thing, working in that lower realm. And they sort of came one after the other, and that just really just reminded me of something that had been long forgotten. It's not something I'd been exposed to before properly, but the sort of things that was known by those women was things that I got really curious about. How are they knowing those things? What's the function behind that? What are they tapping into? And then questions about reality, to be honest, like what is reality now that this is inside rather than outside? Which is another thing we may talk about when it comes to like wise woman versus witch, and some of these concepts. So over the years, I discovered astrology, mainly learning about my own moon sign, which just resonated so deeply. And then I just got deeper and deeper into the curiosity around that. But every piece of astrology that I was reading, whenever one of the astrologers would discuss myths, even in just a cursory way or just dipping into a little bit of myth, I'd just read it and reread it and go back to it again and again. And it was around about the time I was getting into like the Joseph Campbell hero's journey, hero with 1,000 faces, these kinds of concepts at that time. So I just wanted to know more and more and more. But the doorway to myth, I feel, is you got to just hang out at that doorway. And so I did just hang out at that doorway. It's only really, to be honest, in the last maybe 4 years, even though I'd had a lot of exposure to myth, that it started to drop and make sense. And I found my own home mythically in the classical Greek stories, classical Greek statues, vases, pictures, anything that came from classical Greece was I've realized is really just my jam.
Mhm.
And so that's sort of in brief how these stories sort of like kept flirting with me from the from the outside kind of thing. It kept flirting with me and telling me there's something to really explore here. Which,
Mhm.
yeah, up to you where how much you want to go into talking about that.
um, well, we'll dive into some. We'll see where it takes us. I'm
Yeah.
curious though, like from that, how do you feel has your own life changed? Like your own understanding of.
Hmm. Immeasurably, it's changed because the mythic framework, uh, it doesn't give you necessarily answers, but it invites deeper and broader and more interesting questions.
Mhm.
And that was the thing. I was raised in a Catholic tradition, monotheistic tradition, and around about the age of 12 kind of split with the church. And so, but faith had always been a really important part of my understanding of reality and knowing that there's something beyond me. But then the beyond that I was given was pretty much like a, a bearded man in the sky and then another man on the earth. And that's it, in a way,
Mhm.
right? Like that was it. And so then the opening of polytheism and the complexity and of how there's no there's no distinct good and evil beings. In fact, every Greek mythological figure is ambiguous
Mhm.
in a way, right? Like
Mhm.
including Artemis. So there's amazing, beautiful, incredible things about them and really disturbing things about them, all of them. Um,
Mhm.
and they fight each other. They get into battles with each other. They have tension with each other. And then as I've spent more time wandering around, because that's what it feels like. It's a world, and you wander around in that world and check certain things out and feel certain things in that world. And then having done that for a while now, it's like um, I can no longer think black and white. I can think in many shades, and it's unavoidable because it it sparks the imagination, and it's an
Mhm.
ancient imagining that starts to happen. We can see that historically in the Renaissance period, where the those mythic figures started to filter back through, and then there was a huge resurgence of beautiful art that still lives to this day as some of the best and most profound and most deep thought-provoking stuff ever made. And then that
Mhm.
was shut down again, and we go back to a different kind of imagining. So it's changed my
Right.
life mainly because it ignited an ancient way, and it ignited my imagination, which gave me a way of seeing the world that is just completely different now than the me that didn't have myth.
Mhm. Mm. Yeah, I can feel the energetics of it, and that deeply resonates. And I haven't dove into myth per se that deeply, but my own explorations of reality, that inability to see in black and white, and almost that being one of the remedies to some of the major sources of sufferings in this world, right?
Mm,
Because it's that ability to just like shut somebody out and being like you're evil or you're good, and then when you dive
yeah.
deeper into story, like I'm a writer, so I always find that fascinating when you actually, like, good writing, even if it's like a memoir, you have to show the full picture of a person to actually fall in love with them, right? And so it's that,
Mm,
like, we actually wouldn't be able to just write somebody off or judge them if we knew their whole story, right? And to then
yeah.
reflect that in these ancient myths of acknowledging that, right? Of
Mm,
there isn't just the one good bright figure and the one dark figure, and like you fall into one or the other.
yeah. I
Mm.
think it was Jung that said, in monotheism, the good becomes much more good, and the bad becomes much more bad. And it's really the shadow of the all good is the devil, and the
Right.
devil is not a character in Greek mythology. There's no there's no sinister figure in
Yeah.
Greek mythology, and I just love that. Hades is the god of the underworld. He's not. He's one of the three brothers of. He's a brother of Zeus. He's not. He's not cast out. He actually drew straws to see who gets which realm, kind of thing, and he just ended up there in the underworld. And that's a beautiful thing that he helps guide the souls through their end of life process and helps guide them back into the waters, kind of thing. Like
Hmm.
he's not. He does bad things because they all do bad things, but he doesn't
Yeah.
do bad things because his realm is the underworld or he's somehow related to hell. Um,
Yeah.
and that's very healing for me in the tradition that I was brought up in, very heaven and hell, good or bad, good and evil um, tradition that is still very much at play in the world, whether we acknowledge the mythic underpinnings of it or not. But you don't need to look very far to see how one side's all good and one side's all bad, and that's how the myths, the absence of myth, doesn't allow us to think in a way that is like, it doesn't really allow us to take in the whole.
Hmm.
It just
Hmm.
allows us to exile the other.
Yeah. And like,
Mm.
because we're both psychology geeks, like what then comes through for me is, the parts of the brain that are actually not accessible when we live in fear. And so like when we're in fear, that's the outlook of the world that becomes enticing suddenly. That I need to see that what's safe, and I need to like know what's unsafe and what's dark. And
Mm.
when we go into like regulation, we suddenly can see that whole world. And for some reason that connection just kind of hit, where I'm like, it
Yeah,
is that
I
ability
wonder
to
if
really see.
what to go off of that. I wonder if when we're in fear, we go back to the mythic underpinning of the collective, like
Mm,
because we're in fear. We just need to have something that's certain, right? And so then we come back
yeah.
to like, well, what's certain in this culture? And in this culture, it's certain that there's good and bad, and so you can just really settle into that. Oh, cool. Okay, I can see the good and I can see the bad, and that makes me feel okay because I'm connecting back to the origin story of this particular culture,
And it's such
or at
fake
least
comfort, because then you constantly have to look out. Like you can't stop looking for a second, because then you're like constantly needing to assess what's safe and what's unsafe.
exactly.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
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 Hypervigilance comes in then, and then we're in this big hypervigilant world, right? Like it's
Yeah.
crazy. And I think one of the remedies that I found to all of that madness is myth. So
Yeah.
that's where it sits for me, and that's what it's done.
Yeah.
That's what it's done for me, and it's really, I mean, it was largely inaccessible for me for a long time. I just knew the glimpses and glimpses and glimpses, and then I was
Mhm.
fortunate enough to find a mentor in the last few years who's a scholar of classics and an astrologer, and
Mhm.
in his 70s, and really took me under his wing. And so that's really um, that's just given enormous gifts to my life.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Let's bring in Artemis, because it is something that drew me to her. That that essence, that she's so generous and at the same time so ruthless. Like I feel, and you
Mm,
you I know have way more to say to that, but it is that inability to just see her as like only in one way, right? That's not how she shows up.
not
Um,
at all. Mm.
yeah. Let's bring her in a little bit for anyone who's not familiar with her at all. So the pieces in the collection that I just launched that carry her essence, one's called Force of Nature and the other one's called Wild Spirit. And there are numerous things that drew me to her. Like she's known as the goddess of hunt and wilderness, and also the goddess of fertility and of childbirth. And and many things more. But I'm just wondering, as I kind of evoke her and bring her in, what's your like first impression, like that what does Artemis mean to you?
Hmm. Um, yeah, Artemis is a connection to the wild self for sure. That's a nice starting point to get a sense of her. Um, it might be good for the audience to sort of get that Artemis, when she was taken into the Roman tradition, became Diana. She also has a name Cynthia because she comes from Mount Cynthus. Um, and then in the modern day, she's actually still around in the figure of Wonder Woman, who, if you remember the movies, she's known as Diana, which is a direct nod to. So they are basically saying that Wonder Woman is Artemis, and the whole sort of connection to the Amazonians and things like this. So um, we get a modernized version because she's certainly they did a reasonable job in comparison to some of the other um, not great jobs they've done with the old figures. But just to get a sense, like an image for the listener that hasn't even heard of this word Artemis or doesn't know who this is, and for many people that it's like what, who, what, which is totally fine. But to know that it's also it leads into the Wonder Woman sort of archetype in a way. So that gives some people a sense of like, okay, I got a picture there of who she is and what she's about in the modern day. And then from there, we may be able to go and clean that image up to bring it back to like, what did the Greeks see her as?
Mm-hmm.
And, I think her origin story is it's very instructive in that she's the child of Zeus and Leto. Leto is her mother and Zeus is the father. So Zeus is the god of gods. Um, had many encounters with um, many different people all throughout Greek mythology. And she has a twin brother, Apollo, and Apollo is the sun god, and she's the moon goddess. So what happens is that Leto is pregnant. Hera at that time is the goddess of childbirth. She doesn't want to help her with her childbirth because Hera's husband is Zeus. Um, so she's on her own and she gives birth to Artemis, and Artemis comes out and then turns around and midwifes her brother Apollo. So she's born and she straight away goes into role of midwife to midwife her own mother through the process of birthing the sun god Apollo. That's a really nice image to get as far as like, well, who is this? And it's something about these figures like Artemis, like she's born without any question of who she is. She knows who she is. She knows what gifts she brings to the world, and she knows it so well that she's willing to, just upon being born, start doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that about like lunar knowledge. It's like it's not a journey she has to go on. It's not a hero's journey to become. It's a just isness that she represents in that very first story. Like, yeah, I am the goddess of midwifery. I am the goddess of the wild. Like these are things she's going to go out and explore. Um, but it's not like she has to discover who she is. She knows who she is. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I love that piece. It just like the inscription on the back of the pieces is "This is my life," and it's that knowing, right?
Yeah.
Like
It's that knowing.
that knowing, and then you just go on. How did
And the
she?
movement you made of the knowing, just to tell the audience that is listening that it is like that Christina made like a fist and then came down, and it's that sort of like down into her body. It's like it's an intrinsic cellular knowing, and it's yeah, it just there's just an isness to it, that she is one thing and not other things, right? Like she doesn't know herself as like everything. She knows herself as specifically Artemis. Um, that always inspires me to get a sense of like, because that is lunar knowing. Um, and as we get into the complexity of Artemis, we can also see how she sort of changes and everything, and that's part of her too. But intrinsically, she is who she is. It's a beauty to that. Mm.
How does it unfold for her?
Well, oh goodness. I mean, so then she's in so many different things. I guess like there's a generation before that of the Greek gods where you've got Helios, the sun god, and and Selena, the moon goddess, and Eos, the goddess of the dawn. And those are the three that are sort of like, Helios and Selena in particular as the sun god, the moon goddess. And that's a much more sort of old school, like one's driving the sun chariot across the sky, the golden sun chariot, and one's driving the silver moon chariot in the nighttime. So they become then these twins, Artemis and Apollo, and they're very closely linked to each other. It's a very sort of sacred bond between the two twins, the brother and sister, and they love each other intensely. They've got each other's back, and there's certain moments of jealousy and things that also happen between them. So it explores the topic of twins, and it explores the topic of the solar and the lunar archetypally, as far as like solar consciousness, which is much more rational, logical, linear, and lunar consciousness, which is much more felt sense, intuitive, and embodied. And these two that this is why I love the Greeks mythology, because they just play it out through their characters. The tension of that. They're obviously twin flames in a way, right? They're linked to each other forever, but there's a tension as well between that. They're trying to be differentiated from each other, but they're there together. And so, a story that I love, that I'll read out, that on her third birthday, and this is just such a fun one in a way. In her third birthday, she's like on her father's lap, Zeus's lap, and he asks her what she would like for her birthday, and her response is that, and without hesitation, she responds with 6 things. Number 1 is to be allowed to live without having to be distracted by love and marriage. So that gives us a good sense of like what she's not about. Number 2, a bow and arrow, just like her brothers. So she wants to also have a bow and arrow, and she has like the silver bow and arrow versus the gold bow and arrow that Apollo, the sun god, has. Number 3, a hunting costume and freedom from having to dress up like a lady. So she wants freedom from that whole thing. Number 4, the job of bringing light into the world. Number 5, 60 young nymphs to be her companions and to help care for her hunting dogs. So nymphs are kind of like spirits of the forest. And number 6, all the mountains on the earth to live on. So that's the 6 things she wants for her third birthday.
She knows what she wants, huh?
Yeah, she knows exactly what she wants. And again, what she doesn't want. So she's not interested in love and marriage, and she's not interested in being a lady. And there's certain elements of life she's not interested in, which is what puts her at odds with her sort of the other side of her, which is Aphrodite, who's the goddess of love and desire and sensuality, sexuality, and all this kind of thing. And in that way, Artemis is a virginal goddess, but that's a tricky word for what we know today and how we hear that word today. But a simple way to say it is that she's self-contained, that she's fully self-contained. So that's kind of like phase 1. Of course, Greek tragedy, so you can sense that something's going to happen. She's going to run into that opposite energy at some point, or maybe at many points, right? But yeah, I can sort of pause there to get a sense of like who who she is, her connection to the
Mhm.
wild, her connection to
Mhm.
she's a huntress. She's kind of like the chief huntress of all of Greek mythology, but she's also a protector of the young animals and young children. So
Mhm.
she's a protector of pregnancy, childbirth, and young children, even young animals. So she makes sure that everybody is sort of like taken care of, but at the same time, she's a huntress. So once you're full grown, it's game on, right? Like then
Mhm.
she's out in the wild and she's hunting you. And there's
Mhm.
two sides of that lunar goddess principle where yeah, she's very nurturing and caring, and she's going to come and kill you too. And you as the human have to be in that of like, how is this lunar goddess both of those things? How can she be out to
Mhm.
get me on the 1 minute and a full protector of me and my kind on another minute?
Mhm.
The
What do you
ambiguity
take
of
from
that.
that? Like, what do you make that mean in your own life, when we kind of play with her energies and call her in?
Yeah. Well, it makes me think, obviously, it makes me think of mother as far as like the nurturing mother and the devouring mother in that sense. Although that's not fully who she is, that's more Hera and other goddesses take on the full mother archetype. Um, what I think about it is relationship to nature. Um, and she gives us an image of like, yeah, nature is beautiful and profound and alive and embracing and all encompassing. And we are nature, and getting in touch with the animal self. And then also realizing when we get in touch with the animal self, we might find also in there a killer, and we might find violence there, or we might find violence in nature, right? Like I think what springs to mind is that book Into the Wild, where that kid, this was a big book that turned into a movie, I guess, 90s and 2000s. And it's so inspiring. And then he's eventually killed by nature, so because that's nature too. Like the bear may be beautiful to you for a minute and then may turn on you if it's hungry and just kill you, or if it looks at you a certain way, right? The dogs,
Mhm.
so the hunting
Mhm.
dogs are the deer and the dogs in particular are sacred to Artemis.
Mhm.
The dogs are essentially violent, and also loving. And so we can get a sense of even our domesticated dogs when your dog does something that is like animal like, as in attacks something in front
Mhm.
of you. Like, oh my God, no, it was domesticated out of that. So she brings in the tension of the
Mhm.
domestic and the wild. So how does that impact me? Well, it impacts me, and it impacts me that that's the essential tension point, isn't it? Of what would I do if I was free? And that's what she shows you. She's free. She's
Mhm.
she's only she's dedicated to the wild,
Mhm.
which is why she's virginal. So she can't really sacrifice anything of her dedication to that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
Mm.
but she's not in intimacy, which is why she's at odds with. This is the thing when sometimes in the modern age we're like, become this goddess. It's like, no, don't become that goddess. Um, like, be in the tension of that goddess and another goddess. That's a good way to think about it. Whereas, because then it allows Artemis to fully show you that entire archetype and everything great about it and everything disturbing about it. And
Mhm.
then you can put her at odds with say Hera, or you can put her at odds with Aphrodite, and then you can see her tension point with the mother or with the lover.
Mhm.
And as humans, we're living in that. We don't get to be. Um, I guess some of us can choose that, but if you choose that as a human, the other side becomes the shadow.
Mhm. Mhm. Like what I'm kind of receiving from that is like the resisting that temptation to hand myself over entirely to some force or goddess, or like, oh, this is my savior, right? They're only good, and if I'll be protected by them, right? And so it brings back that in a way that that piece of like, for me to fully know who I am, right? Evoking that from her, like, this is my
Mm.
life. And yes, I can, as you're saying, in juxtaposition of these archetypes, of these energies, be like, yes, there's things that I can receive from that, and there's things that I can learn to be like, no, actually, that's not me. And to kind
Mm.
of reach that point that she did as a 3-year-old, right? Of,
Yeah.
this is what I want, and this is what I don't want, and this is my particular expression, and it might not be everybody else's expression, right? That's not what Aphrodite's expression is. That's her.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly. And so then, and this is just such an important point to really get that, yeah, as the humans in that are living our lives, it's really dangerous to be consumed by an archetype. So to be consumed by just one, um, and which is like, maybe that's a way to get out of the tension of all of this life that we have to live. Like, we have to be the ones making hard decisions, um, and of course, there's a desire to be free of that. And sometimes the archetypes can be like, oh, I could be like Artemis and be just dedicated to the hunt, whatever the hunt is in your life. So maybe I'll just be, um, in my career and calling, and not at all in love and partnership, right?
Mhm.
And it's like, well, you are not a god or a goddess. You're a human, and actually, the choice to go too far in the direction of one archetype does pick up the shadow of the other, and that's how to work with wisdom within these. So we get to experience the stories, and like, how does that play out between them? Everything in Greek mythology is amplified, which is why it's often over the top, which is turns people off Greek mythology a lot, because it can be very violent, and there can be a lot of transgressions, and it can be like, oh, this type of mythology condones these awful behaviors. It's like, it doesn't condone them, but it acknowledges that they're in existence,
Mhm.
and because it's in existence, they write about them, they tell stories about them. It's
Mhm.
pre-moralistic story. It's
Yes.
pre-moralistic. And that's hard for the modern mind to get their head around. It's like, are you saying I should be hunting animals in the No, we're not saying anything like that. We're exploring an archetype.
Mhm.
Um, and then where it lands for you, what it calls forward in you, helps you, as you say, make statements about who I am and who I'm not. So Artemis says, I'm not going to dress up like a lady. I'm not going to do that. Getting married to a man thing. That's not going to be my game. Very clearly.
Mhm. Right.
Yeah.
You did mention that she eventually does encounter those dynamics in her life. Can you share a little bit more
It,
about those aspects?
yeah. I mean, this is, I think, where we get down to, um, the real complexity of her existence in a way. So, I'll spare some of the details and just give because I don't want to bring in too many names and things. But let's just say that there's a character named Orion, who we all probably have heard of from Orion's belt and everything in the sky. Um, and Orion is a very handsome man, and he, very beautiful man, has all the adornments and everything, and an amazing hunter. So, Artemis comes in contact with Orion, and is like, wow, this is my kind of man, you know. But he's been told by this king to clear out this whole land of the wild, right? So his form of hunting is like, whoa, oh man, he's not stopping.
Mm.
He doesn't know where to. He is beautiful and has all this electricity and pull to him. So she's really pulled towards that. But then he won't stop. He's just gonna kill everything. So she has this awful tension around that. And this is a thing in Greek mythology. There's like so many different versions of this story, and they're all kind of a little bit confusing. But there's some kind of a transgression. Like they get together, they're sort of hunting together, but then he doesn't stop, and then he sort of turns on her, and that's one of the stories. Another version of it is that Apollo, the brother, gets jealous, and
Mhm.
basically says to her, like, I bet you can't hit that thing way over there in the distance. It's like a boar or something. She thinks that she can't see exactly what it is. And she takes the challenge and gets the bow and arrows. And obviously, because she's Artemis, strikes it without a problem. But it turns out being Orion. So in that version of the story, Apollo, who's jealous of her finding somebody else, sort of manufactures the thing where she kills him. That's one
Mhm.
version of the story. And another version, basically, he transgresses against her. Any version of the story basically comes out the same way, though, that eventually she's so broken by this, she's so hurt by this encounter that she has this never again statement. And I
Mhm.
think this is the shadow of Artemis energy that is really a beautiful one to look at in the world and in the soul and in the self, because we all get hurt by love along the way. Because Eros also has arrows, like it's that arrow hurts in
Mhm.
ways that nothing else really can, possibly, because we really care really deeply.
Mhm.
That's why it hurts so much. And
Mhm.
she says, Artemis says, well, she kind of goes like, I knew I shouldn't have got involved with men. I knew I shouldn't have got involved with love. Never again. And then sends the scorpion out into the sky. So Orion gets released because he's died. He gets released as the constellation of Orion. And on the opposite side of the sky, even today, is the scorpion of Scorpio. So the two follow each other around the sky forever, basically. The scorpion always following and hunting and trying to take him out. Now, then she's in never again mode, right? So she goes back to the wild. She just gets her nymphs around her, and she makes sure she's completely protected and never seen by, um, never encountering again. And I think this is the element of Artemis's journey that we can really take in. Like, where is my never again
Mhm.
feeling? Or
Mhm.
if we look into ourselves, like, when was that moment where you encountered love and got hurt by it and went never again? It's not necessarily that everyone will have that feeling, but I'm sure a lot of people do know this experience. Never again, you know? And so then the sort of final chapter of this story, in a way, is tragedy. It's Greek tragedy. But Artemis is there bathing naked, and it's just her nymphs around and everything. And there's another hunter that enters the scene named Actaeon, and Actaeon loses his whole hunting party. Now Actaeon's just a good guy. He's just a king. He's just like off with a hunting party. He's not involved in anything. But then he stumbles in to this grove, and Artemis is there naked, and she looks at him. You can imagine this moment. Like, he doesn't know where he is. He's like, "Oh my god, I'm sorry." He's trying to cover his eyes and back away from this thing, and all her goddess fury comes out. Now, all that goddess fury was really should be directed at Orion and everything that happened there, but it's buried now. And when it
Mhm.
comes out, it gets it directed fully at Actaeon, the innocent. And she does something, and this is Greek mythology warning, content warning. She turns Actaeon into a stag, which, don't forget, is um, her own sacred animal. And he
Mhm.
runs as a stag into the wilderness, and his own dogs catch his scent and track him down and kill him. Don't
Mhm.
forget, the hunting dogs are also sacred to Artemis.
Yep.
So we got this kind of really amplified, really, you know, wow, okay, this thing.
Mhm. Mhm. Mm. Yeah, feels like I'm just sitting with when you're speaking to the never again, and I
Yeah,
definitely have had those moments, and to see in a way what comes of it, right? The pain that can come from that, or the ability
yeah,
to hurt that can come from that.
the ability to hurt. Yeah, and I think, why I love the Greek stories is that they don't give you a solution. They don't give you necessarily a way to
Mhm.
find your way out, but they do show you, the tragedy, which is to say, like, if you go with never again, there's every chance you'll have that Actaeon experience.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like let the gods and goddesses play out the most horrific stuff so you don't have to. So if you can
Yeah.
imagine it playing out that way, you don't have to play it out that way. And that's, to me, is the medicine. So we
Mhm.
can say, like, okay, yes, I've been hurt. Yes, there's pain. There's pleasure and pain when it comes to love, and the pain can be unbearable. Um, and yeah, I put my armor up and I'm in never again mode. And is there a way for me to find healing and help around that?
Mhm.
You know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what also comes though is like that never again energy, like how to still honor it, right? Because it was against
Mm.
what she knew was truly who she is, was true. Like she knew that from like being 3 years old. And in a way,
mm.
she like trespassed that, and to honor the like the lesson from it of like, yeah, and I can honor that that's not my path to like never again go there without the hardening of the resulting tragedy, right? Where
Yeah.
is that? Like, how can I find the help and the healing while still honoring what I'm taking from that? That I don't need to repeat that. Like, I don't need to ever do that again, but with a
Yeah.
softness to it of like, because that is who I
Exactly.
am and I can be true to that, but I don't need to hurt anybody by staying true to that.
And that's such a beautiful, yeah, you bring up the layer under the layer there of betrayal. You know, that the story seems that she's been betrayed by either Apollo, her brother, or she's been betrayed by Orion himself, or there's other versions, you know. But ultimately, as you say, she betrayed her knowing of who she is,
Mhm.
and she transgressed against who she knows herself to be. Um, and yeah, that led her into a hardening that led to the tragedy, as you say, and the softening into that of like, yeah, this is the complexity, isn't it?
Mhm.
It's as the humans, we can hear stories like this and find relationship to this, and
Mhm.
you know, obviously astrologically, and there's an astrologer named Jason Holly who goes really deeply into this material, and he's just fantastic. So if your listeners want to look him up or already know about him, just really recommend going and listening to him. But you know, as an astrologer, that's part of the Scorpio mythology is this piece because it's the
Mhm.
scorpion. It's literally the
Mhm.
scorpion of Scorpio that she sets loose on Orion.
Yeah.
And so we are dealing with like really hard emotional responses to things and real deep tragic pain.
Yeah.
um, and the myth allows us to hover around and linger in places that are really uncomfortable for a little longer because it's not happening to us, but we know what it's referring to,
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm.
And when we lose stories like this out of our culture, then when something tragic happens to you, like a betrayal or a transgression or something violent, there's no real story to spend your time in,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and as you're saying that,
Yeah.
like just the other day, as I was working through some of my own stuff, and I often do so through writing, and it's uncomfortable. It's like, really, I have to like to really have to write about this stuff, but I know
Mm,
there's healing in it. So I'm like, come on, keep going. And as you're saying, like the gift of these stories, of these myths, is that we don't have to live through it, but just in this conversation that we've had, there's so many parallels of my personal life where it reminds me of situations, and there's a softening in me and a relief of like, oh, like a glimpse of the bigger picture of just a, this is not all in vain. The, there's just something bigger behind it all. And
mm,
yeah, it's exactly what you're saying, of how you said in the beginning, what draws you in. It's that we have these stories to live through them, and we can kind of receive the healing where it resonates. And I remember you saying another
Yeah,
time we spoke how in different times it resonates in different ways, right? You kind of pull different things from it each time you kind of
exactly.
revisit the same exact, right? It always is a little bit different, but same exact story or myth. Um,
And that,
mm,
I mean, what a treasure that is in a way, in to have stories that you can go back to that change with you. And that's
mhm,
why, you know, these,
mm,
when we go back to myth, there's a difference between mythology and someone who's written a story. You know, because someone
mhm,
writes a story, they bring all of their own stuff to it. They can't help it. But myth wasn't written. It was it was written down later, but it was dreamed up. You know, it was dreamed up, and um, a lot of different bards and, you know, poets and storytellers told
mhm,
multiple versions of the story. So the beauty of myth is that it never, um, even as I'm telling you this story of Orion, there's so many variations. You know, I'm going into
mhm,
this one because this is what is here and alive at the moment for us to discuss, and it's such an essential part of the Artemis mythology in my mind. But we could go to the same story and get a completely different thing, you know, which is
mhm,
the ambiguity of story, which is why the modern, you know, solar world doesn't is sort of done with it. Like, no, we want to move away from the mythological and into the rational and logical.
mhm,
Uh, and the amount that we lose by doing that is actually really phenomenal, especially in the soulful places, like the ability to
mhm,
sit with things that are just really hard, and like you say, encourage us to see it as part of a timeless part, just to even to connect to the timelessness of our own stories. Even the tragedy of
mhm,
our stories are part of that timelessness. It's not happening, as you say, in vain. It's not happening because I'm being punished by some all good God because I've done some all bad things, even in past lives or something, or before I was even born, or just the fact that I am born and then I'm being punished for that by these things. Like, the idea of that, no,
mhm.
you know,
Yeah, yeah.
no, it's not like that. But yeah, we may
Mhm,
have to wrestle with some of these gods and goddesses for sure.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. Yeah, but again, the piece that I feel when I hear that, right, it just makes me and it has been a bit of a personal mantra and a reason why I wrote it on the back of those pieces, but this is my life piece of can I how can I kind of make peace with past versions of myself and just
Mm,
fully own that of this is my life
mm,
with
mm.
all that it comes, right? The past lives and the ancestors and this particular version of it and the choices that this particular version has made up until now and
Yeah,
is still gonna make. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
And being able to be with all those old regrets and remorses and pains and self betrayals and everything, and see it in a greater context of like, yeah, there was something that sort of had to happen um, here. There was something that
Mhm.
I just, if I was at a if I was a different place, something different would have happened, but I'm not, you know.
Yeah.
So, and it just helps you get real. It's funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's old stories, ancient stories, not even from
Yeah.
this time and place, but they are timeless. So they help you get real in a they help you get real with yourself,
Mhm. Yeah.
you know, and
And
help
drops the
free
what
us
if,
from
you
and
know,
drops the
it's like
what if.
it's
Yeah, it's
done.
like it's done. And for some reason, it was part of my fate, something that
Yeah.
the Greeks really explored as well,
Mhm.
and that helps us to at the very least settle into it and go like, yeah, at the very least, I know that this is my wrestling match.
Mm. Oh, thank you. So rich. So yummy.
Welcome.
Hmm. We'll slowly kind of wrap this delicious conversation up. For anybody who kind of fell in love with your storytelling and just the work that you do, how can they find you? How can they work with you?
Yeah, the website is onthesoulsterms.com, and so the um, I guess the statement at the heart of my work is on the soul's terms, um, and I have a podcast exploring stories and all sorts of different stories. I have really interesting people coming on. It's effectively an astrology podcast, but I would say um, rooted a little deeper in the mythology. So lots of stories and explorations on that, and you can find everything else on the website. Um,
Amazing.
and with a bit of luck, I'll be into the teaching role pretty soon and bringing through a few things and having ways for others to access some of this stuff in a using the step down transformers to bring it to more people.
Yes. Yes, I'm cheering that on. Amazing. We'll
Same.
we'll put
Thank
the
you.
website in the show notes, and yeah, thank you so
Awesome.
much, Chris. Amazing.
Yeah, well, thank you for thinking of me,
Yeah.
and you know, it is just an area that I love to enter. So, thanks for the
Mhm.
opportunity.
Yeah.